Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in layers of turbulence. And it's like the human species keeps adding more layers. There's the Gaza layer on top of the Ukraine layer, on top of the climate layer, on top of the infodemic layer. And you can keep going on. It's a challenging time. And it's also a wonderful time. The human capacity, human connectedness have never been greater, and the capacity to make makes change has never been greater. And one thing I've been doing a lot of shows on is the power of localism to become global. Global, local goes in two directions. And Pete Seeger was such an inspiring figure for me and millions of other people right from the time I was a kid. My Aunt Martha introduced us to folk music. I had a couple of his albums, and then I moved to the Hudson Valley in the early 90s, the beginning of the 90s. And there was Pete Seeger, like 15-minute drive, 10-minute drive from my house in Garrison up in Beacon. And there was a Beacon Sloop Club, and I started going there, bringing my guitar and my mandolin. And there was a cluster of people who had been in the region or settled there and who were convening around the idea that music can matter. And I got to know this guy named David Bernz. And then one day he introduced me to a wonderful woman who became my wife. we met 31 years ago through David. He said, "Hey, you want to come to brunch? There's a girl here I want you to meet." So Pete Seeger has been entwined in my life at a very meaningful level for a long time. And David Bernz was a big part of that. And here we're going to have a conversation about Pete through the context of David's book. David Bernz is a lawyer, an activist, a lifelong musician who hung with Pete Seeger right from childhood, basically, through family connections you'll learn about. And he has put together a book drawing on recordings that he made on a little 4-track tape recorder, a recorder over these years preceding Pete's passing in his mid-90s 10 years ago. It feels hard to believe that was so long ago. David, I'm sure it feels the same way for you. So we're going to just dive in here a little bit. There'll be music, a warning, and there'll be Pete's words through the recordings that David made that are the part of this book. So David, first of all, it's just great to be with you here from Maine, you back in the Hudson Valley. And how does it feel to have pulled together a book?
Boy, that's an interesting question. You know, my whole life I've been many things, but an author was not one of them, and I really never thought I'd be one. And in a way, I got to be an author through the back door because 2/3 of this book I didn't write. It's transcriptions of things that Pete said. And then, of course, I added commentary. And especially towards the end of the book, I actually did some writing because Pete didn't like to lionize himself. And yet Pete did wonderful things right here in Beacon, putting his life philosophy to work right in his own community. And I felt that needed to be portrayed in the book as well. So in the later part of the book, I did some significant writing, but really 2/3 of the book is Pete. And then, of course, not wanting to be the only other voice in a book about Pete's rich life, I contacted a lot of friends and other musicians and had them put in little commentary as well. So I don't know if I feel like an author, but I feel pretty amazed that something I was involved with is actually published. I'm very pleased about that.
That's really exciting. And you know, it takes a lot of work, even if it's, as you said, more than half of it is Pete's words. Those words wouldn't be archived and memorialized if you hadn't been there. So can you tell a little bit about that process? You know, what you've been hanging with him for a very long time. Just tell a little bit of the story of your family connections to him.
All right.
And when you started recording stuff, like why were you?
Okay. I'll read the short version because you have a short show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Pete knew my father and mother. They were both in sort of the progressive and musical circles in New York City. And so I knew Pete growing up, not all that well, but as I grew older and got involved in Clearwater, I got to know him better. And Clearwater always happened in Croton-on-Hudson, the big revival festival to raise money for the environmental organization. And I lived in Croton, so it was very much part of my childhood. And so Pete and I did know each other. And when I moved to Beacon, Pete's hometown, Pete learned that I was there, and he learned that I had a little Tascam 4-track cassette recorder, one of those high-speed home porta studio things that we all used to use before the world went digital. And he began to call and ask to record things. And he was Pete Seeger. I wasn't going to say no.
Right.
So he'd come over and he'd record an interview for the BBC, and I'd send it off, and he'd record, an interview for the Harry Bridges project out in San Francisco, and I'd send it off and so forth. And it just developed into a relationship where he got comfortable recording at my house, and the projects kept going on. And quite a few of them were spoken word before, I did produce some musical CDs for Pete, but a lot of what he said into my microphone was spoken word. And one particular day, he was doing some Hudson River stories, and I remember that he picked up my copy of Carl Karmer's book that's just called The Hudson. And I mentioned this in the introduction, and sadly, it's spelled Carl Karmer with 2 Ks when it should be it should be 2 Cs. So buyer's warning, there are typos in the book. But
well, hopefully there'll be multiple editions, and then you can fix it.
But anyway, he picked up the book, and he never opened it. He just closed his eyes and started talking. And for an hour, he just held that book and spoke. And at the end, I listened to it, and I said, "Man, that's pretty eloquent. I'm gonna have this typed out and see what it looks like in print." And when I saw it, I contacted Pete, and I said, "Pete, a lot of the things you've been saying into my microphone are going to look pretty good in print with very little editing." And so we began to correspond, sending stories back and forth and red marking them and so forth. Pardon.
Yeah.
And working on a book together. And that's what resulted in this book.
It's just great. Let me just flip here to the table of contents, because it gives people a sense of the flow of the book, which goes right back through his early history, and a lot of it which was around labor rights, socialist leanings, and the like, and then his time in the Hudson River Valley and the Weavers. The Weavers were a really important part of his life and your life, right? Could you just talk about the Weavers? And maybe we'll play that Weavers clip in a minute.
Oh, well, yeah. There's no good way to put this because I don't want to insult any current music. I like all forms of music and many current players. But as I was growing up, I listened to a lot of Weavers recording, and there was a certain optimism and verve and power in those folk arrangements that I wasn't hearing in a lot of other music. And so the Weavers' music informed many of my musical sensibilities. And I don't think it was just because of the family connection. When my father did work on the country's first urban folk song magazine called the People's Songs Bulletin, which later morphed into Sing Out magazine. And back there, my father did meet Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and Lee Hayes of the Weavers and many other people. And it was Lee Hayes that became a very special friend of my father's. And they shared an apartment in New York City before my father got married and moved out to the suburbs. But even out in the suburbs, Lee would come visit almost every weekend if he wasn't touring with the Weavers. Us little kids would jump on him on the couch and find him there on Sunday morning, pound on his belly, wake him up. I'm sure he didn't like it, but he was nice to us. And we called him Uncle Lee. And eventually, when he got a little older, he bought the house next door to us, and that's where he spent his retirement. So it was very much a family connection with the Weavers and the Weavers' music. And for a while, I even had a group that sort of recreated some of the arrangements called Work of the Weavers.
Right. Let me play this clip from your batch of recordings and from the book. Hold on a second.
After the war, now the Cold War broke out, and it was a bad time for the United States of America. But the funny thing was, it didn't make that much difference to me. I sang for little lefty groups here and summer camps in the schools there. I didn't expect to get commercial work. And then in 1950, totally unexpected, a new group, not the Almanac Singers, but the Weavers, Lee Hayes and two other people, Fred and Ronnie, and we all of a sudden had hit records. Goodnight Irene was on the top of the hit parade week after week after month in the summer of 1950. And we had a string of pop records. But the blacklisters, they probably said, how would he let those commie so-and-sos slip through our fingers? They were as surprised as we were. And they started cutting us down in late 1950 and cut us down more in 51. And by 1952, we were singing in Daffy's Bar and Grill on the outskirts of Cleveland, and we decided to take a sabbatical. As Lee has said, it turned into a Mondacle and a Tuesdacle.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. We're at a time right now where polarization and politics cancels people in so many different ways. What comes to mind when you think about that and his experience too?
Well, I wouldn't compare completely the two eras, but there are similarities. America was very, very polarized in the time of the blacklist, and it was very much of a chilling effect on the arts because if you said anything controversial, they would call you a communist, and that was good enough to be blacklisted, even if you weren't. So sometimes I think of how many great songs were not written during that era that could have been, or how many great plays. I don't think the arts are being chilled right now, but I think our democracy is under threat right now. I actually think the threat is greater now than it has ever been. But I'm hoping that America will wise up and be smarter than to sacrifice their democracy in exchange for some fake form of safety and comfort that really won't be real anyway.
Yeah.
It's one of the great ironies of history that every time they tried to blacklist someone, especially Pete, it backfired on them. Yeah, they blacklisted Pete. The Weavers couldn't get on the radio. So what happened? Pete started singing in colleges. He brought his music, and in summer camps, and he brought his music to young people, and all those young people became singers and activists and sung us out of the Vietnam War and sang on civil rights marches. So I'm hoping that this will also backfire.
One hopes, and I think his evolution and the way he worked is a model for almost anybody. There's another clip, let's talk about one thing that characterized him was his passion for talking to everybody or opening up circles a little bit. He and I differed on some things like nuclear power. Even many of us did.
Yeah, you and I differ on that too.
I know, but we found ways to play together and talk through the complexities and the like. So how much of that is a part of what you lay out in the book, the philosophy section?
Yeah, well, I hope it's a huge part. The idea of this book was to minimally edit Pete's words so that you could actually hear Pete. If you knew him, you could hear him again. And if you didn't know him, you could at least hear the gentle way with which he laid things out. And a big part of what I hope people absorb as they go through the book is that Pete was the type of person who really appreciated the ways in which people find commonalities. I mean, Pete is known for music, and he's known in the Hudson Valley for the Clearwater and sailing and for being an environmental activist. But those who knew Pete best and who listened to Pete the most understand that what he was really about was finding the commons, the areas where people can get together and find things that they have in common and get to respect each other in a way and appreciate each other in a way that the forces that be these days are trying to wash away. They're trying to make us feel like we're a bunch of divided camps. And sometimes I wish I could just put my arm around someone who I totally disagree with and say, yeah, we disagree on that, but don't we both like to make chili with that little bit of mole sauce in it? Let's talk about chili. And let's talk about, at some point in this friendship, let's talk about the fact that I understand your discomfort. I know the country's changing. I know, with immigration the way it is, white Christians are going to be a minority. I know that makes you feel uncomfortable on some level, but let's talk about it. Because, years ago, centuries ago, when everyone lived in tribes and everyone was most comfortable with their own kind, that was a matter of survival, right? It was necessary. But now, where we have weapons that can wipe each other out in minutes, we have to evolve to a different reality. And, I think that if you start with the commonalities, communication is more possible.
No question about that. And he talks about that in the context of the Beacon Sloop Club. Actually, hold on. Let me see if I can play another one of the quotes.
Darrell Williams quote, which I know what you don't have up on the screen, but Darrell Williams gave a quote in this book, and she was so wonderful in explaining that. And she said a great thing. She said, I wouldn't call Pete a communist. I would rather label him a communitarian, because that's really what he was. So look for community.
That's a good word. Yeah, here she is, Darrell Williams. Communitarian is a really good word.
Yeah,
for him.
But
there it is.
When words fail, it was just as good on that point.
By the way, get ready to, if a song comes to mind, get ready to pull out your guitar or your banjo, whatever you have handy. In the meantime, let me make sure people know they can ask questions. And in fact, I will prompt folks to do that. And let me pull up another clip, because again, the book is about Pete's words. What's fortuitous is you have the actual words too. So do you think there could be an audio version of the book at some point, meaning like an audio book, but
pieces of the book could be put out in audio, but these recordings were made under a variety of circumstances. Some at Pete's home with cooking noises in the background, some on the decks of the Clearwater with the engine noise in the background, but others in my home studio where it's very clear. So I couldn't put the entire book in an audio book, but I could put sections of it.
Yeah, so here's another clip. Let's hear it.
Whole new period of history we're in, where we realize that there won't be any human race unless the human race learns to talk. King also felt that violence was a dead-end street. His way of putting it was, violence is a descending spiral. With violence, you can murder the hater, but you don't murder hate, you just increase hate. He said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And in a sense, it's a kind of love when you're willing to talk to somebody you disagree with. The hope of the human race is communication. And words are good, but they can fool you. I would say there's probably no word under the sun which means exactly the same thing to two different people. Even the word yes or no. What do we do when words fail? Well, we can use pictures for one thing, and great pictures have sometimes changed the course of history, like the picture of a little girl running naked down a Vietnamese street with her body on fire from napalm. And millions of people saw that picture and changed their mind about the war in Vietnam. I'd say all the arts should be used. If we're going to save the human race, we've got to use all the arts we have, whether they're pictures or melodies or words, poetry or dancing or food. Cooking is one of the greatest arts in the world. We use it as an organizing tool up and down the Hudson. I called a meeting for the Beacon Clearwater Club. Only 3 people showed up. My wife said, don't call it a meeting, call it a potluck supper. 30 people showed up.
There you go. And
that's classic.
Yeah, and as a blogger, and a lot of my reporting and what I do on this webcast is about conversation. The only way to get past that business of a word having multiple meanings is for people to talk about talk about a word, or to start to exchange. When you say climate emergency, what is in your head?
Right. When someone says woke, what is that?
Yeah, right. What are you talking about? And that's so important. And that's a big part of what Pete facilitated. There are also some photos in the book, and here's just a little bit of that. What was the most, as you were talking with him, I know one of the biggest surprises for me was when I interviewed him with Andrew Bleckman from Orion magazine on the 30th anniversary of the magazine. And we were talking for a while, and Andrew said, Pete, what gives you optimism for the future? And I'm sure you know. And he there was this, you could see his brain working for about 2 seconds, and then he goes, "Oh, the internet." And now he didn't have a computer, right? I don't think he did.
Yeah,
but he said,
email Pete Seeger.
Yeah, no, I know. Lots of postcards. So what surprised you the most as you got to know him over the years? Was there something that cut against what you would have thought or presumed?
Well, there were a lot of surprises because, and most of them were on a personal nature, because I had seen Pete from the stage, and I had seen organizations such as Clearwater and the Beacon and the Sloop Club and the Hudson River Sloop Singers, the Walkabout Clearwater Chorus. But when you're in a studio with someone and it's all one-on-one, or an interview with someone and all one-on-one, and you get to know someone very well over time, and that barrier that first exists when your brain is saying, I'm sitting here with a legend, I better treat him with some respect, and you're relating on a human level, you're in a way sort of surprised that the man is just another human being. Yeah. He has his cranky moments, he has his happy moments. He sometimes used a 4-letter word. I saw him crack a beer open at the end of one rough day. I shouldn't be surprised at any of that, but it was just great to see. And I remember coming over to his house one time for an interview, and he comes out of the kitchen with a big tray of deviled eggs. Says, "Hey, Dave, I made some deviled eggs. See if you like them." Those kind of things were always pleasant and a little surprising coming from the folk music legend.
And then there's the Toshi effect.
Oh, sure.
And I want to get to Woody Guthrie, but to talk a little bit about Toshi and how she relates to his story, his narrative.
Well, first of all, it was a wonderful long-term 60-year love story, and where they were really unified in their beliefs. And in a way, she sacrificed a lot for the man she loved because she was a creative person. She had production skills in the movie area, and she was a great artist and potter, making clay pots, and she passed those talents on to her daughters. But she put most of that on hold. She was heavily involved in the Rainbow Quest, that public television show in the 1960s. But other than that, she mostly put all that on hold to be Pete Seeger's wife. And that was actually necessary because Pete was the idea guy, but let's hold a festival over here. And then it was Toshi's organizational skills that actually made it happen. How do we secure rights to that thing? How do we secure porter sands? How many rolls of toilet paper do we need for 2,000 people? All of those details were really Toshi. And also, Pete traveled a lot when the kids were young. Toshi had to hold down the whole fort. There's a great photograph. I don't think they put it in the book. I'm almost sad about it, but or did they? I'm not sure. But Toshi is sitting at the table, and it is festooned from, the dining table is covered from one end to the other with papers and correspondence, and she's taking care of it all. And she's sitting there, and there's a cat sleeping in one box of papers. And I showed it to her, and she said, "David, give me 6 copies of that. I want to send it to my relatives so they'll finally understand."
Oh, interesting.
She made it happen.
Yeah. And let's talk about a little bit more. Well, actually, maybe it's time for a song.
Okay. Let's see. This banjo wasn't working the other day, but hopefully. I think Pete started this song in the 1990s, but he didn't finish it till shortly before he passed. I think it's the last verse that has that little touch of the philosophy of, we differ, but let's find a way through. Because it's got a great line in it that says, "Oh yes, sometimes there's tangles. We all see truth from different angles." Nice rhyme. Let's see if I remember. It's called Sister Moon. Sister moon, we see you through the trees. You're watching us while walking home. Papa's son, another side of earth, making all so green, making all so green. Ah, yes, 6 billion pairs of feet, seeking a path, seeking a way, while walking home, walking home, walking home, walking home, walking home. And on the way, we're harmonizing as each voice finds a part to sing, high or low. It's not surprising how good it sounds when voices ring. Ah, yes. Sometimes there's tangles we all see true from different angles. Walking home, walking home, walking home, walking home one more time. Walking home, walking home, walking home, walking home, walking home, walking home.
Beautiful. Yeah, his clever, he had the ability to do profound songs and the ability to do really fun songs. You have a section in the book where you mentioned English is crazy, and I used to love to hear him sing that. And when he did, there's certain things that can't be replicated in words, like when at Little Stony Point, when he would play Abioyo, and he would be dancing through the kids, like this lanky string bean of a guy hopping around singing Abioyo. That physicality of him as well was really interesting. And of course, doing this, as you just did with the call and response. In fact, on my blog, on my Substack thing at the top, I have a picture of him doing that, because to me, as we were saying earlier, communication really is a relationship. It's not me. It's not a one-way thing. And the way he sang was implicitly participatory.
Yeah. In fact, he had a song that not many people know. I can't sing it, but it's called One of These Days or Else. And one of the lines and one of the verses in that song was, someday we will all learn each other's languages. And the very first thing we'll learn is how to listen.
Yeah. Here's Alan Thomas saying he'd say, then recite the Gettysburg Address or sing a song he learned 50 years ago. Hey, Alan, how are you? A lot of our Hudson Valley friends are here. Rick Pelleri, Donna Nessler. And then out west, Joanne McGarry, who's helped me broaden the musical spectrum here. She says the Napalm Girl has been my Facebook profile photo for a few weeks now. And there she is. Joanne's from Humboldt County in California, has been watching this show for a long time. Getting back to the book, there's a really nice Publishers Weekly review of it that I hope everyone reads, which says, for folk aficionados, this is a must read. I think it's got value beyond the folk community. And I'm hoping that people who watch this or, stumble onto your book elsewhere realize this is not just about music. It's about a way of living. You mentioned some of the aspects of his way of living that you feel like I do were valuable. I don't know if anything else comes to mind. He also was an activist. You think about the Peekskill riots. Let's talk about that aspect too, the hard edge part of Pete too. He wasn't just touchy-feely.
there's one little part to the story of the Peekskill riots that I think is very telling. Yes, this was the fervor of the McCarthy era and the commie-phobia of the 1950s and so forth. And in the midst of all of that, they were going to have this progressive black man, Paul Robeson, come to right-wing Peekskill into a concert.
Yeah.
And obviously those two things did not mesh. And the first time they tried to throw a concert, a bunch of hooligans came and stormed the place and got into fistfights with the organizers, and they burned the chairs and the music, and people almost were going to get killed until the police came and stopped it. And so there was publicity about that. And so when they decided to throw the concert anyway, a couple of weeks later, the fervor was that much higher. The publicity was that much higher. The stakes and risks were that much higher. The unions had decided to come to the rescue and provide personnel who could make a giant ring around the entire concert area in Cortland near Peekskill to prevent anyone from getting in. But that wouldn't stop all the danger. As you know, they stoned the cars on the way out on the road. But here is Pete walking up to the stage, and he knows that just beyond that ring, up in the hills, are people who absolutely hate him and what he stands for. And he knows some of them have guns. And what does he do? He tries to find something in common with them. He doesn't say it in words. He knew that the song Tea for Texas was a huge hit on the country radio that month and that whole season, really. And all those people up in the hills were probably listening to it. And so he looks up to the hills with his banjo and he sings them Tea for Texas.
That's so cool.
That's what he does. And then he looks down at his own people, his own constituency in the field, and sings a brand new song at the time called If I Had a Hammer, the Hammer of Justice, and so forth. What a moment. And very
Boy, that really says so much right there. Wow. Talk a little bit about the his later years. You have a section, well, toward the end, you go through the last hurrah, and what has I like to think, and I've written that his experience in life and he and Toshi and the movement locally that they built is resonant and carries on. We also were just talking about how hard this moment is, and he passed away, as did Toshi, before Trump was elected, before social media became a very poisonous place. Do you have your own personal sense of whether this sort of Seeger style can make a difference these days?
I don't know for sure. I hope so. I don't know what Pete's reaction to everything that's happened since he passed in 2014. The Trump era, the era of extreme divisions, the unrest in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, COVID-19, so many huge things. But given his life and given the fact that the philosophy that developed was very strong, I think he would have continued in the vein that he did. I think he would have said to himself, well, these are tough times, but let's keep people talking with each other. Let's keep finding things we have in common. Let's keep trying to sing together. And let's see other people as human beings, not as enemies. I think that's what he would have done. That's
Absolutely.
my best guess.
Start with the humanity, the shared humanity, and work outward from there.
Let's find our common chili recipe and cook it together.
Yeah.
Let's get on a boat and just sail this beautiful river. If you look at it close enough, you're not going to need me to tell you it needs to be guarded and kept clean.
Absolutely. I want to play another clip that I have here. And if anyone has questions, I see some neat comments. Sarah Underhill says, I didn't realize this. The 75th anniversary of the Peekskill riots is this September. There are great events planned, including performance of Robeson's repertoire on the site of the riots and also at the Paramount.
Thank you, Sarah.
And David, you're, I didn't mention, you've won 2 Grammy Awards. You're one of the quietest Grammy winners I know. And you're heading on the road to the West Coast. Can you talk a little bit about your plans there and, how people can connect with you about the book and your journeys going forward?
Well, my son Jesse is in the process of making davidbernz.com. I've managed to reach age 65 without a website, but we'll hopefully have the calendar up there very soon.
Good.
But yeah, well, first about the Grammys, my wife yells at me when I say this, but she's not watching right now. I tell her that it wasn't my production skills that made me a Grammy winner. It was the lifetime of good work that earned Pete a great deal of goodwill with people who vote for Grammys, and that I was just sort of a conduit for that to happen. But the way that happened really was very organic. He had asked me to work on a CD for the back of his book. He was putting out a new edition of his life's work in a book called Where Have All the Flowers Gone? And when the first edition came out, there was no CD in the back. And he very much wanted a CD in the back that had just 30 seconds of each song, one verse, one chorus, that kind of thing, so that people could just know what he was talking about, especially people who didn't read music necessarily, because the sheet music was in the book. But as you know, Pete was always out to reach the widest audience possible. If he could speak to the animals and the amoebas, he would make them happy, So I set about making this CD for the back of the book. And when I realized that about a third of the songs in the book had never been recorded by anybody, not even Pete,
wow,
we got involved in recording them. And sometimes I would just record one verse and chorus, but because of various reasons, including the fact that Pete was getting older and wasn't always singing each verse perfectly, I would often record the whole song, or some of the time anyway. Anyway, when that project was almost over, I got a call from Jim Musselman of Appleseed Recordings. He introduced himself as being Pete's record company and said that Pete hadn't put out anything in a very, very long time. He was 89 years old at the time. But he said that Pete had mentioned to him that we had been working together making recordings. Is there anything we could have put onto a CD that he could sell? And I explained the hodgepodge of things and the partials, and some being guest artists and some being instrumentals and some being spoken word, and and he kind of scratched his head and said, well, send me a sample. So I did that. He liked it. So he said, you're now a CD producer, make me a CD. He sent me a small budget. I hired a bass player and some background singers and a few instrumentalists to plug in where the empty holes were. I sent it off to him, figuring he'll do with it what he will. He contacted me and said he likes it. He's not only going to put it out, he's going to put it in Borders books and end cap displays and all these things that I have no knowledge of. And right. I basically took the position that, okay, you're in the record business, do what you do. And a few months go by and I'm driving along in my car, and the phone rings, and it's Jim Musselman again. And I've never met him in person. This has been all over the internet. And he said, I just want to be the first to tell you got nominated for Folk Album of the Year. So that's kind of how it happened. And, having won a Grammy and later on a second one with the Rivertown Children for a children's album with Pete, I figured I'd let the Grammy people know that I'm coming out with a book. And they generously said that I could come out there and do a presentation on it. And then when I realized that the expenses of going to California for one event might not make sense, I started calling around to see what other events, and Copperfield Books up in Petaluma decided to have me for a release event. And I got another event at Pickleby's Books, and I'm working on a third. I think I'll have 4 or 5 events before I'm done with the schedule, and we'll put them up. And it'll be between June 10th and June 20th, I believe.
Good. Well, the more the better. I'm going to post, if folks want to learn more in the meantime, they can go to your music store website too, where there's information on the book. And there I just posted at jakesmainstreetmusic.com. Jake being Jacob Bernz, your son, your older son, who's a part of your musical journey for sure. And the music store has become its own little hub there in Beacon, New York, which is kind of exciting. I hope to I'll be there next weekend. My gosh, and hope to stop by.
Jacob is such a brilliant songwriter. He's written over 1,000 songs, and I can't believe what he comes up with. Sometimes a song he throws away, I love and I rescue.
I know. There's that one about, oh my gosh, I recorded a mandolin part for it about the river East
River Serenade.
East River Serenade is a beautiful song. Well, there's a lot of people watching. Hopefully they can explore the book more. I wanted to ask you, of course, a big part of his journey related to Woody Guthrie, and then Bob Dylan sequentially. Bob, there's a movie being made about parts of that relationship. So talk about Woody too. Woody and Pete. That was such a big and important era, distinct from the Weavers moment.
Yeah, Pete tells the story of meeting Woody in the book. I think I sent you a clip a little bit about it. But really, back when you're 20 years old, someone who's closer to 30 is a lot older and a lot more experienced. And that's the experience that Pete had when he met Woody, is that here's this guy who I can learn a lot from. It was a great relationship. They traveled the country together. In fact, in one section of the book, Pete explains that Woody taught him how to hitch rides in cars and freight trains, and also how to sing in saloons. He says, Woody told me to put the banjo on the counter and order a nickel beer so people would see the banjo and then sip it really slowly. And sooner or later, someone will say, hey, can you play that thing? And says, don't be eager. Say maybe a little and keep on sipping your beer. Says sooner or later, someone will offer you a quarter if you play a tune. And that's when you swing it around and play your best tune and get things going. So
quick, which clip is it? The one that's called When Words Fail, or is it another one? The one with Woody?
I think I sent you one on Woody. Maybe I failed to.
It's okay. People should read the book.
That's true. That's true.
And again, hopefully those recordings, whether it's Smithsonian or somebody, should be out there and archived.
But Pete utilized the skills that Woody taught him, not only musically, but in one section of the book, he explains that because he learned how to hop freight trains and hitch rides and be on his own, he decided to do it by himself the following year. I think it was just before 1940, might have been 1939. No, it was 1940. It was probably late 1940 because he met in 1940. But anyway, he explains he hitched rides up and down the Appalachians to Tennessee, to Kentucky, where he learned the song "Which Side Are You On" from Florence Reese, the woman who wrote it. And he made it all the way down to Florida, where people were jamming and stuff. And in the end, he says, I would have graduated Harvard in 1940, but I learned a lot more about my country than I ever would have at Harvard.
He sure would have. So you ended up in a relationship somewhat akin to his relationship with Woody when you were in your 30s, 20s.
Well, I'm not comparing myself to Woody.
You weren't hopping freight trains.
But I was glad to have a relationship with Pete. That was, both friendship and professional. Obviously, I made recordings for him and so forth.
Yeah.
But, I like the friendship part a lot, where we're in the woods chopping a tree together and that kind of thing.
There's another clip you sent me that I'm going to set up now on Pete and the Clearwater and sailing, which is really kind of cool.
Sailing down my golden river, sun and water.
I always thought sailing was a rich man's sport. But once I had a job on Cape Cod, and a teenager took me out at midnight in a little beetle cat, and he showed me what fun it was to tack a little bit to the left and then to the right, and then turn around. It's not how fast you go, it's the fact you move at all. It's a game with the wind and the waves, something almost spiritual about it. Back in the Hudson, I bought a little plastic boat, and I was teaching myself how to sail it. I saw the whole world slowly grow dark, and the mountains turned to purple, then to black, and the river, which had been golden, changed color gradually. Made up a song about it.
Raise my sons and daughters, golden sparkles in the foam.
Beautifully said, beautifully produced too. And having spent a big chunk of my life sailing, I know that mystical relationship. And it also involves not going directly where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of sailing, is realizing you're constantly compromising and following, sensing the wind, sensing the environment around you. And I do think Pete had that ability in social context as well, sensing the tides and and resisting them, not just becoming a pop singer or the like, but finding his way even in those contexts, like he did on the Smothers Brothers show. Is that in the book when the show got canceled shortly after he?
I believe it's mentioned. I don't know if the full story is told in the book. I don't recall.
Well, he sang Big Muddy, I believe.
Yeah, well, I did read the book written by Tommy Smothers, I believe, wrote the book. Things were very tight with the network back then. They were supposed to film the show, have it edited, and then a certain amount of hours in advance of airing, I think it's 1 or 2 days maybe, have it over to the network so that the censors can go through it. Well, Pete had sung Waist Deep in the Big Muddy on their show in the middle of the Vietnam War. Tommy Smothers had fought hard with the network to allow Pete on in the first place, but they agreed because he was still blacklisted technically. Mm-hmm. And he sang the song, and without informing Tommy Smothers, the network, apparently the censors, edited out the song. And I haven't seen the show, but everyone said it was an awkward clip because one moment Pete is holding a banjo and a second later he's holding a 12-string, which is not physically possible. So the whole world knew it was an edit. And when it came out that song was edited out, there was a months-long protest and letter writing and so forth, embarrassing the network. And so finally they said, all right, he can come on and sing the song. And there was a second appearance where Pete sang the song with great gusto. So that's the basic story. But, that was part of what made the network so angry at Tommy. And that, plus some of his other habits, did result in the show being canceled. Yeah.
Kind of remarkable. Joanne McGarry posted a beautiful thought. Pete is the ultimate trim tab. A trim tab. This was Buckminster Fuller had this idea that a big airplane, it's these little trim tabs that can really generate a lot of impetus, kind of like with a battleship going.
And he kept finding his way forward. The blacklist pushed him back, and I do mention this in the book that as long as you have the perseverance, then you can keep navigating those little, like you say, those little eddies and currents in a way that brings you towards where you want to go. And that's very much like Pete's life. The Almanac Singers got a big radio gig singing Round and Round Hitler's Grave on national radio. Wow. But right after that, people wrote in, what are you letting those lefties on for? And suddenly the Almanac Singers were not going to get any work. But then come the Weavers, and we know they were blacklisted. But then Pete started singing at colleges and camps, and each thing. And by the way, in the 70s, Pete had a contract with Columbia Records, and someone contacted him and said, "Do you know that they're keeping most of your records on the shelf in the warehouse?" Right. Pete wanted to be heard, not for an ego thing, but he had a mission. And for that, you do have to interact with mass distribution of one sort or another. And they kept pushing back, and he kept finding his little ways forward. And I love the fact that when you think about it and say, my gosh, Pete has been heard. He's been heard probably way more than most commercial performers that were able to navigate the straight line because they went with the current of the industry. But over the years, Pete's been heard more.
That's true. And of course, his songs got picked up by the Byrds and other people, so that all those reverberations carried on. We have to talk about Bob Dylan and the Axe, which is in the book.
Of course we do.
Especially with the movie coming. So tell us about this, his recollections of that point when electric music was coming into the folk arena.
Well, Pete really didn't have anything against the electric guitar. In fact, he once said, that's the folk instrument of the 20th century. He once actually opined that. I think, though, that words were important for Pete, especially words that had important meaning. And to cover them up with the blaring electric guitar was something that he didn't like. And by the way, something I don't like. I've seen Bob Dylan live in concert a few times, and I'm sorry to say this in public, but it was very hard to discern the words over the sound. I sometimes disagree with the way modern sound is mixed. But anyway, in Newport, Pete had brought his father, Charles, the musicologist, to hear the great Bob Dylan. And, getting hard of hearing as you get a little older is a Seeger family trait. Everyone knows that Pete had to have hearing aids for many years later on. Well, Charles was hard of hearing at this point. And when Dylan came out electric, they couldn't hear the words. And that upset Pete. Pete said it was a good song. Dylan was singing Maggie's Farm. Ain't going to work on Maggie's Farm no more.
Mm-hmm.
And which has great allegorical meanings, as you know. So Pete walked up to the sound person and said, "We can't hear the words. The guitars are too loud." And apparently the sound person just gave him a smug answer like, "Well, they want it that way." And Pete gave him a smug answer back. "Well, if I had an axe, I'd cut that cord." But that's all there was to it. Pete just walked away. This notion of someone running around with an axe physically trying to cut the cords never happened. Pete would never have done that. And I actually spoke to the people making the movie. I met the actor Ed Norton, who's playing Pete. He's a very nice guy. And I think they're going to treat Pete respectfully in that regard in the movie.
Yeah, well, we'll see. That's kind of cool that that story is being told, and hopefully they're drawing on insights from all the narratives and the book itself. Maybe, I don't know if one more song comes to mind, one or two, before we call it an hour here. It's great to connect with you indirectly. I'll see you probably in a week, hopefully. Well, I know you will, because we'll be performing.
Yeah, full disclosure, folks out there. Andy and I are friends, and I've stopped up at his house in Maine, and are you going to be staying with me when you come down? Or?
I think so, come to think of it.
Okay.
There is that. Yep, I can't wait. We do miss the Hudson Valley. It's funny when you... We reserved room 2. We hear there's a queen size bed and everything.
Hey, you have a great song about the Hudson Valley, from Breakneck Ridge to the Bear Mountain Bridge.
I'm glad you like it. Pete liked it too, which made me really happy. And that was something. He was so eager to help others. Even how many postcards I have somewhere, and his scribbles on lyrics and stuff. Same for you, I'm sure, and many others. I know many people who used him as kind of a sounding board, literally.
Yeah, his life was rich in correspondence, and Dan Einbender points out in the book, for folks out there who don't know, Dan Einbender was a wonderful soul and Clearwater volunteer for years and an educator and a folk musician. But he says in the book that one of Pete's curses was that he had made an oath to himself to answer every piece of mail that ever came to him personally. And when it got that voluminous, it got to be very hard, but he did it.
Michelle Marcus was just asking where we're performing. Michelle, there's a benefit for the Howland Center, which the doorway to the Howland Center is kind of crumbling. And Jeff Wilkinson and Jonathan Kruk, the storyteller, put together a Hudson River and story and song event for Saturday evening at the Howland Center.
May 11th.
May 11th. So just Google for Howland Center, Howland.
Yeah, my son Jacob and I will be there as part of it.
Yep. I'm going to play a couple songs.
Hi, Michelle.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone here. So maybe one more song from you, and then I might end with a little video clip from Pete too.
Let's see. Okay.
You did a song about his banjo, right? Didn't you?
Yeah. Is that the one you want?
Well, no. Whatever you really feel captures some aspect of what you learned writing the book and being with him so long.
Well, I'm going to do something that I've never done before.
Okay.
I think I may have sang this song on your show once before. I'm not sure of that, but let's see. Pete got in trouble a little bit when he wrote the song with Lori Wyatt, God's Counting on Me, God's Counting on You. He has this great section in the book where he says, you don't get to a busy street and say, God, save me. It's a tough street. No, you use the brains God gave you. You look left, you look right, you cross when it's safe. And he says it's the same way with the future. Don't say, God, the world's in a troubled place. No, you find what needs to be done and you do it. It's like the old saying, God helps those who help themselves. So God's counting on you and me to fix the world. And he used the word God in the song, and a lot of the left-wing people are like, saying things like, well, we're atheists. Why are we going to sing God? And I disagree with that point of view. First of all, Pete reached out to a wide audience, and he doesn't want to sing for only atheists. And also, God means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I finally used the word God in a song. And it's based on actually when I was standing with Pete in his driveway looking at the woods. And I asked him, did you ever go to church, Pete? And he said, well, he looked at his woods and said, every time I open my eyes, I see God. Mm. And so that's an inspiration for this song. There's a light in her eye and a glow on her skin, and it's not from the sun, it comes from within. But sometimes she hides in a box of regret. She keeps on a shelf in the room we met, and then turns away like we've just had a fight. Then her foot touches mine in the middle of the night. Every time, every time, every time I open my eyes, every time that I open my eyes, I see God. Ever since he's come home, Tom has not been right. He just sits in his chair, stares out at the night. He'd never hurt no one, but they ordered him to. Now the weeds grow tall where the porch fell through. But somewhere he's traveling in a great caravan, bringing sweets to the children in the town of Trank Bank. Every time, every time, every time I open my eyes, every time I open my eyes, I see God. Now outside my window, there's a song all around, and it flows from the trees, grows up from the ground. It sings me a tale of the gold of the sun, and the rivers and the canyons where the wild rivers run. And the birds fly so high in the silvery sky, I can hear them all sing. They're telling me why. Every time, every time, every time I open my eyes, every time that I open my eyes, I see God.
Beautiful. And I should mention, I think, thank you, David. That was just that's a beautiful tune, and I hadn't heard it before. Certainly not on the show. There's an event today in down in Putnam Valley, right? Are you going down to the Seeger Fest?
Yeah, I was going to go down with my son Jacob, but he's not feeling well, so I'll do a few songs on my own. But there'll be some great people there. I think R.J. Storm will be there with his bluegrass friends, and I think Rick Nestler might be there. I think Betty and the Baby Boomers might be there.
Sarah Underhill mentioned it
Tompkins
today.
Corners Cultural Center all afternoon in Putnam Valley, New York on, I think it's us. Is it Peekskill Hollow Road? Yeah, Peekskill Hollow Road.
I get lost, even though we lived there right over the hill from there for so long. I always got lost going there, but it's easy to find on Google Maps. It's a Tompkins Church, and you'll find it. David, I'm going to play one more. This is a clip from the interview I did with Pete, a video one, and let's just get his face here.
Early in the morning, I first see the sun. I say a little prayer for the world. I hope all the little children live a long, long time. Every little boy and little girl. I hope they learn to laugh at the way some precious old words seem to change. 'Cause that's what life is all about. to arrange and rearrange and rearrange.
The old Not Earth logo.
Orion's doing a 30th anniversary project.
30 years.
30 years.
Congrats.
Well, thank you. And what we're trying to ask people to do is basically come up with something, a noun, that we'll need for the next 30 years in order to live with, to survive well on the planet and to flourish and to live with some form of grace.
Stabilization. Economists say, oh, you must grow or you die. And of course, if we keep on growing, I sat up in bed at 1 o'clock and said, if it's true that if you don't grow, you die, doesn't it follow that the quicker we grow, the sooner we die? The world is only so big, and if we come to the point we have to grow or die, we'll die.
You know, I just thought it was so interesting that he picked stabilization. It's a word that's, you know, he didn't say justice, he didn't say revolution, he didn't say. I thought maybe a closing reflection might be for you to think about what that captures about him.
You're asking that of me?
Yeah, as a human being, and as the author of the book.
Well, Pete probably said it best. There's a story in the book, a fictional story. The book has a place called Some Fiction, called The Hexagons. And the concept of that story is that people discover on Mars, when they explore it, that there was a civilization there millions and millions of years ago, a technological society, but it destroyed itself. And then there was a second technological society that destroyed itself as well. But finally, there was a society that was very conservative, very stable. They didn't invent new dangerous things and put them out there. They tested them and made absolutely sure they were safe worldwide before using them. And were very conservative in that way, and had a very stable society. And that one finally lasted for millions of years until the planet itself ran out of atmosphere. And he was actually proud to call himself a conservative in that regard, that he thought changes, especially changes that involve risky, dangerous technology, should happen slowly. I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does, and the book answers many more questions. So David Bernz, my good friend, great to connect with you here electronically. I'll see you in the real world. This is part of the real world, but I'll see you soon in Beacon. And I encourage folks to explore this book, to get the book if you can. jawbonepress.com/chopping-wood. I'm showing the URL there, and how the chapters capture the themes of his journey, Pete Seeger's journey, which lasted nearly a century and brought us so much joy and passion and connectivity that it's hard to begin to express his value. So we're going to call it there. It's a busy day. You've got your Seeger activities. This was his 105th birthday was Friday. It would have been. And there's lots going on this weekend. So David, thank you again for everything you do, for capturing these words and doing your own singing. And
thank you. I'm not used to doing this, and you made me very comfortable. You're very good at this, Andy. I thank you.
Well, do more. We can do more, and I'm happy to help you as you push the book around. And thank you again for being here today. So hold on one